I smoothed my wedding dress for the 100th time, unable to stop smiling as I gazed at my reflection. After years of disappointment, I'd finally found the one. Carter was everything I'd ever dreamed of, handsome, successful, and utterly devoted to me. In just a few hours, we'd be husband and wife. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. "Come in," I called. My best friend Leanne poked her head in, her eyes wide. "Addison, you look stunning," she breathed. Then her expression shifted, growing serious. "Can we talk for a second?" My stomach clenched. "What's wrong?" Leanne hesitated, then blurted, "It's about Carter. I overheard something." Before she could continue, my father burst into the room. "There's my beautiful girl," he exclaimed, enveloping me in a bear hug. "Are you ready to knock 'em dead?" I used to smile, pushing aside the unease Leanne's words had stirred. "Ready as I'll ever be, Dad." The ceremony passed in a blur of flowers, music, and Carter's adoring gaze. As we shared our first dance as husband and wife, I felt like I was floating on air. Nothing could spoil this perfect day. Hours later, flushed and giddy from champagne, I scanned the reception for Carter. He'd mentioned needing to catch up with an old friend, but that had been ages ago. I spotted Leanne by the bar and made my way over. "Have you seen Carter?" I asked. Leanne's smile faltered. "Not for a while. Addison, about what I was trying to tell you earlier." "There you are." My new mother-in-law's shrill voice cut through the crowd. Eleanor appeared at my elbow, her perfectly coiffed hair not budging as she air-kissed my cheek. "Darling, you simply must come meet the Andersons. They're dying to congratulate you." I shot an apologetic look at Leanne as Eleanor steered me away. For the next hour, I was paraded around like a prized show pony, shaking hands and making small talk. All the while, a nagging worry gnawed at me. Where was Carter? Finally extricating myself from Eleanor's clutches, I retreated to a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. No messages from Carter. I dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. "Everything okay, Pumpkin?" My father's concerned voice made me jump. I plastered on a smile. "Of course, Dad. Just trying to track down my wayward husband." Dad's brow furrowed. "That's odd. I could have sworn I saw him leaving with that redhead. What's her name? His ex-girlfriend?" The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "Vanessa?" Dad nodded slowly. "That's the one. But I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation." I barely heard him, my mind racing. Vanessa, Carter's old friend. The ex he'd sworn was ancient history. "Addison?" Leanne appeared at my side, her face etched with worry. "You won't believe what I found out. On the night of your wedding—" I held up a hand, silencing her. "Let me guess, it's about Carter and Vanessa?" Leanne's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess," I said bitterly. "Excuse me." I pushed past them both, ignoring their calls as I fled the reception hall. Outside, the cool night air did nothing to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. Hurt, betrayal, and fury warred for dominance as I paced the empty parking lot. My phone buzzed. A text from Carter. "Sorry, got caught up. Be back soon." "Love you." I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision. How could he do this? On our wedding day of all days. A car pulled into the lot, headlights sweeping across me. I squinted, recognizing Carter's sleek sports car. As it drew closer, I saw two figures inside, Carter behind the wheel and a familiar redhead in the passenger seat. My hands clenched into fists. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it was quickly becoming my worst nightmare. I stood frozen as Carter's car pulled into the parking lot. My wedding dress suddenly felt like a straitjacket, constricting my breathing. As Carter stepped out, his eyes widened in surprise. "Addison, what are you doing out here?" I ignored him, my gaze locked on Vanessa as she emerged from the passenger side. "Having fun catching up with your old friend?" I spat. Carter's face paled. "It's not what it looks like, I swear." "Really? Because it looks like you abandoned your wife on our wedding day to run off with your ex-girlfriend." Vanessa at least had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm so sorry, Addison. I didn't realize." "Save it," I snapped. Turning to Carter, I hissed, "How could you do this to me?" He reached for me, but I recoiled. "Baby, please, let me explain." "Explain what? How you lied to me? How you made a mockery of our vows?" Carter's expression hardened. "You're overreacting. Nothing happened." "Nothing happened," I laughed bitterly. "You disappeared for hours on our wedding night." "I told you, we were just talking." "In your car? For hours?" I shook my head in disbelief. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Carter's eyes flashed with anger. Maybe if you weren't so damn insecure, I wouldn't need to seek companionship elsewhere. His words hit me like a slap. Before I could respond, Leanne appeared at my side. "Everything okay out here?" she asked, eyeing Carter suspiciously. "It's fine," Carter snapped. "This is between me and my wife." Leanne bristled. "Your wife who you abandoned at her own reception?" Carter rounded on her. "Stay out of this. You've always tried to come between us." "Don't you dare blame Leanne," I snarled. "She's been more loyal to me tonight than you have." Our raised voices had drawn attention. My father emerged from the reception hall, his face thunderous. "What the hell is going on here?" Carter's demeanor instantly changed. "Bruce, just a little misunderstanding. Everything's fine." Dad's eyes narrowed. "Doesn't look fine to me." He turned to me. "Addison, sweetheart, what happened?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I explain this humiliation? Carter jumped in. "It's nothing, really. Addison's just upset because I stepped out for a bit. But I'm back now and we can get back to celebrating." Dad's gaze shifted to Vanessa, who was trying to slink away unnoticed. "And who might you be?" Before she could answer, Eleanor's shrill voice cut through the night air. "There you all are. What on earth are you doing out here?" She bustled over, taking in the scene with narrowed eyes. "Carter, darling, your guests are wondering where you've gone. And Addison, really sulking in the parking lot? How unbecoming." I felt my cheeks burn with anger and shame. "I'm not sulking," I managed. "I'm trying to understand why my husband abandoned me on our wedding night." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be so dramatic, dear. I'm sure Carter had a perfectly good reason." "Oh, he had a reason, all right," I muttered, glaring at Vanessa. Eleanor followed my gaze, her eyes widening slightly before her mask of civility slipped back into place. "Well, whatever's happened, I'm sure we can sort it out privately. No need to air our dirty laundry in public." "Dirty laundry?" Dad growled. "If that boy has hurt my daughter." "Now, Bruce," Eleanor cut in smoothly, "let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure this is all just a big misunderstanding." I looked from Eleanor's forced smile to Carter's pleading eyes to my father's concerned face. The weight of expectations and appearances pressed down on me, threatening to suffocate me. In that moment, I made a decision. "You know what? You're right, Eleanor. This isn't the time or place." I straightened my spine and fixed Carter with an icy stare. "But don't think for a second this is over." With that, I turned on my heel and strode back towards the reception, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. As I pushed through the doors, Leanne hurrying after me, I realized with crystal clarity that my picture-perfect marriage was nothing but a beautiful lie. The weeks following our disastrous wedding night were a blur of tense silences and half-hearted apologies. Carter swore up and down that nothing had happened with Vanessa, but the seed of doubt had been firmly planted in my mind. One particularly gloomy afternoon, I found myself alone in our apartment, restlessly pacing. On impulse, I grabbed Carter's laptop. He'd always been protective of it, and a nagging voice in my head whispered that there might be a reason why. My hands shook as I opened it, surprised to find it unlocked. As I scrolled through his emails, my heart sank. There, in black and white, was proof of Carter's betrayal, not just with Vanessa, but with multiple women. The emails dated back months, even before our engagement. I was still staring at the screen, numb with shock, when the door opened. Carter walked in, his easy smile faltering as he took in my expression and the open laptop. "Addison, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight. I looked up at him, tears streaming down my face. "How could you?" Carter's face hardened. "You had no right to go through my personal emails." "Personal emails?" I scoffed. "You mean your collection of love letters to half the women in the city?" He strode over, slamming the laptop shut. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" "Because it looks like you've been cheating on me since before we even got engaged." Carter ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "You don't understand. My job, sometimes I need to entertain clients. It doesn't mean anything." I stared at him in disbelief. "Entertain clients? Is that what you call sleeping with other women?" "Don't be so dramatic," he snapped. "This is why I didn't tell you. I knew you'd overreact." His dismissive tone ignited a fury in me. "Overreact? You've been lying to me our entire relationship." Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. "Dinner at our house tonight. 7 p.m. sharp. We need to discuss your behavior at the wedding." I laughed bitterly. Your mother wants to discuss my behavior. Isn't that rich? Carter's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I showed him the text. Apparently, I'm the one causing problems in this family. He sighed. Look, let's just go to dinner and smooth things over. We can discuss this later. Part of me wanted to refuse, to scream and rage and throw his lies back in his face. But another part, the part that still clung to the hope of salvaging something from this wreckage, nodded in agreement. Hours later, we sat around Eleanor's immaculately set dining table. The tension was palpable as we picked at our food in silence. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Addison, dear, I think we need to address your little outburst at the wedding. I gripped my fork tightly. My outburst? She nodded, her smile not reaching her eyes. It was quite unseemly, causing a scene like that, in front of all our guests, no less. I glanced at Carter, but he studiously avoided my gaze. I'm sorry if my reaction to finding my husband with another woman on our wedding night was inconvenient for you, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Eleanor's smile tightened. Now, I'm sure it was all just a misunderstanding. Carter has explained everything. Has he? I turned to Carter. Did you explain about all the other women too, or just Vanessa? The color drained from Carter's face. Eleanor's eyes darted between us. What other women? She asked sharply. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking. Would you like to see the emails, Eleanor? I'd be happy to share. Carter lunged for my phone. Addison, don't. But it was too late. I'd already pulled up the damning messages, sliding the phone across the table to Eleanor. As she read, her carefully composed mask cracked, revealing a mix of shock and fury. She looked up at Carter, her voice ice-cold. Explain, now. As Carter stammered out excuses, I stood up, suddenly feeling suffocated. I think I've lost my appetite, I said, heading for the door. Behind me, I heard Eleanor's voice rising in anger, Carter's pleading responses. But I didn't look back. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of something like hope. The truth was out, and there was no going back now. I paced my living room, my mind racing with possibilities. The truth about Carter's infidelity was out, but I knew that wasn't enough. He'd manipulated me for too long, and Eleanor would undoubtedly try to sweep everything under the rug to preserve their precious family image. No, I needed to do more. I needed to take control. My phone buzzed, a text from Leanne. How are you holding up? Want me to come over? I hesitated, then typed back, Actually, can you meet me at Café Noir in an hour? I have an idea. An hour later, I sat across from Leanne, my hands wrapped around a steaming latte. I'm going to expose Carter, I said without preamble. Publicly. Leanne's eyes widened. Addison, are you sure? That's a big step. I nodded firmly. I'm done being the victim in this story. It's time to write my own ending. We spent the next 2 hours plotting. Lean, bless her, threw herself into the plan with gusto. By the time we left the cafe, we had a strategy that made my heart race with equal parts excitement and terror. The next day, I called my father. Dad, I need your help, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Anything. Pumpkin, what's going on? I took a deep breath. I'm going to confront Carter and Eleanor, publicly, at the charity gala next week. There was a long pause. Addison, are you sure that's wise? It's necessary, Dad. I can't let them keep controlling the narrative. Will you help me? Another pause, then a sigh. Of course I will. What do you need? We talked for an hour, refining the plan. By the end, I felt a surge of gratitude for my father's unwavering support. The week leading up to the gala was a blur of preparations. Leanne and I worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and coordinating with trusted allies. My father used his connections to ensure key people would be present. The night of the gala arrived. I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing down my crimson dress. My hands shook slightly as I fastened my necklace. This was it. No turning back now. Carter was waiting by the door, looking handsome in his tuxedo. For a moment, my resolve wavered. How had we come to this? Ready to go, darling? He asked, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The ballroom was a glittering sea of wealth and influence. Eleanor held court near the center, her laugh tinkling artificially as she greeted guests. I felt her eyes on me as Carter and I made our rounds, but I studiously avoided her gaze. An hour into the event, I caught Leanne's eye across the room. She gave me a subtle nod. It was time. I made my way to the small stage where the band was playing. With a deep breath, I stepped up to the microphone. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. I hope you're all enjoying the gala. I have a special announcement to make. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. I saw Carter's confused expression, Eleanor's narrowing eyes. Many of you know me as Carter Williams's wife, I continued. What you may not know is that our marriage has been built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Carter started towards the stage, but my father smoothly intercepted him. I've recently discovered evidence of my husband's multiple affairs, dating back to before our wedding, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I believe in honesty and transparency, which is why I'm sharing this with you all tonight. Eleanor pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of fury. Addison, stop this nonsense at once, she hissed. I ignored her, pressing on. I refuse to be silenced or shamed for someone else's actions, and I refuse to let this family's obsession with appearances overshadow the truth. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and pressed a button. Suddenly, the large screen behind me lit up, displaying a montage of Carter's incriminating emails and text messages. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. I saw Carter's face pale, Eleanor's eyes widen in horror. In that moment, standing before the truth laid bare, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever happened next, I knew I had taken back control of my story. And I was just getting started. The room erupted into chaos as the evidence of Carter's infidelity flashed across the screen. I stood firm on the stage, my heart pounding but my resolve unshakable. Carter's face had turned ashen, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. Eleanor, however, was a force of nature. She stormed towards the stage, her carefully cultivated mask of civility crumbling. "How dare you?" she hissed, grabbing my arm. "You ungrateful little—" "Let go of me," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my limbs. "You don't get to control this narrative anymore, Eleanor." She released me as if burned, turning to address the murmuring crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, this is clearly a misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law is unwell. We'll sort this out privately." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Unwell? Is that what you call it when someone refuses to be manipulated and lied to?" Carter finally found his voice. "Addison, please, let's talk about this at home." "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, my gaze sweeping the room. "I wanted you all to know the truth. About Carter, about this family, about the lies we've all been living with." Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tension. "I can vouch for what Addison is saying." I turned, shocked to see Vanessa pushing her way through the crowd. Carter's face, if possible, grew even paler. "I was part of Carter's deception," Vanessa continued, her voice shaking. "But I can't keep silent anymore. Everything Addison is saying is true." The room exploded into fresh chaos. I saw my father move to stand protectively near me, while Leanne hurried to my side. But my focus was on Carter and Eleanor, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. Eleanor's eyes blazed with fury. "You little tramp," she spat at Vanessa. "How much did they pay you to say that?" Vanessa flinched but stood her ground. "Nothing. I'm here because it's the right thing to do." Carter finally seemed to snap out of his stupor. He strode towards me, his face a mask of desperation. "Addison, please, we can work this out. I'll do anything. Just don't do this." For a moment, I wavered. The look in his eyes, so familiar and once so dear to me, tugged at my heart. But then I remembered all the lies, all the betrayals. "It's too late, Carter," I said softly. "You had your chances. This is me taking control of my life back." Eleanor, seeing she was losing ground, changed tactics. Her voice took on a sickeningly sweet tone. "Addison, darling, think about what you're doing. This scandal could ruin us all. Is that what you want? To destroy this family?" I felt a surge of anger. "Family? You call this a family? A web of lies and manipulation, more concerned with appearances than actual love or support?" I turned to address the crowd again. "I'm done being silent. I'm done playing the perfect wife in this farce of a marriage, and I'm done letting fear control my actions." With shaking hands, I removed my wedding ring. The diamond glittered under the harsh lights as I held it up. This ring symbolized promises that were broken long ago. I'm returning it, along with all the lies and pain it represents. I placed the ring on the podium, the soft clink seeming to echo in the stunned silence of the room. "Addison," Carter pleaded one last time, "don't do this. I love you. I met his gaze steadily. No, Carter, you love the idea of me, the perfect wife who would never question you, never challenge you, but that's not who I am anymore. With that, I stepped down from the stage, my head held high. As I walked through the parting crowd, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with legal battles and emotional turmoil, I was sure, but for the first time in months, I felt truly free. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. The days following the gala passed in a blur of legal meetings and emotional upheaval. I threw myself into my work at the boutique, grateful for the distraction. But even as I helped customers find the perfect outfit, my mind raced with thoughts of divorce papers and asset division. One particularly exhausting afternoon, I returned home to find Carter waiting on my doorstep. My heart clenched at the sight of him, a mix of anger and residual affection warring within me. "Addison," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please, can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded curtly. 5 minutes. Inside, Carter paced the living room while I stood with my arms crossed, a physical barrier between us. "I've been in therapy," he blurted out. "I'm trying to change, to understand why I did what I did. I know I hurt you, but I love you. Can't we try to work this out?" For a moment I wavered. The man before me looked so different from the confident, manipulative Carter I'd come to know. But then I remembered all the lies, all the pain. "It's too late, Carter," I said softly. "I can't trust you anymore." His face crumpled. "What about everything we built together? Our dreams, our future?" "Those dreams died the moment you chose to betray me," I replied, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Carter's demeanor suddenly shifted, his eyes hardening. "You'll regret this, Addison. You think you can just walk away? I'll make sure you have nothing when this is over." A chill ran down my spine at his threat, but I stood my ground. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door. After he left, I called Leanne in tears. She arrived within minutes, armed with ice cream and a fierce determination to protect me. "We need to be prepared," she said as we sat on my couch. "Carter's not going to make this easy." The next morning, I woke to a flurry of notifications on my phone. My heart sank as I scrolled through messages from friends and coworkers, all asking if I was okay. With trembling fingers, I opened my social media accounts. There, splashed across my feed, were private photos and messages taken out of context, painting me as unstable and vindictive. Carter had launched a smear campaign. I felt the walls closing in, my carefully rebuilt world threatening to crumble once more. But then I remembered the strength I'd found within myself. I wouldn't let Carter destroy me again. I called my father and Leanne, explaining the situation through tears of fury. Within hours, we had assembled a team of lawyers and PR specialists to counter Carter's attacks. Days blurred together as we fought back. For every lie Carter spread, we responded with truth. It was exhausting, but I refused to back down. The turning point came unexpectedly. I was at the boutique, trying to lose myself in work, when Vanessa walked in. "I'm so sorry," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I can't stand by and watch Carter destroy you like this. I have proof, emails, texts, everything, showing he's behind the smear campaign. I'll testify if you need me to." I stared at her, shocked by this unexpected ally. "Why are you doing this?" Vanessa smiled sadly. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I was once in your shoes. I wish someone had stood up for me then." Armed with Vanessa's evidence, we took the offensive. Carter's carefully constructed lies began to unravel, and public opinion swiftly turned in my favor. But just as victory seemed within reach, I received a call that made my blood run cold. It was my lawyer, his voice grave. "Addison, Carter's filed for full control of your assets. He's claiming you're mentally unstable and unfit to manage your finances. There's an emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow." I felt the room spin around me. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, was suddenly at risk. Carter was making his final desperate play to regain control. As I hung up the phone, I realized this was it, the moment that would define everything. I could crumble under the pressure, or I could stand tall and fight with everything I had. Taking a deep breath, I made my choice. Carter had underestimated me for the last time. Tomorrow, I would show him and the world exactly what I was made of. The final battle was here, and I was ready. The morning of the emergency hearing arrived with a sense of foreboding. I stood before the mirror, smoothing down my most professional suit, trying to project an image of stability and competence. My hands shook slightly as I fastened my necklace, a gift from my father, a reminder of his unwavering support. Leanne arrived to drive me to the courthouse, her presence a comforting anchor. "You've got this, Addison," she said, squeezing my hand. "We're all behind you." The courthouse loomed before us, its stone facade imposing and cold. As we climbed the steps, I spotted Carter and Eleanor arriving, both impeccably dressed and wearing matching expressions of smug confidence. My stomach churned, but I lifted my chin and strode past them without a glance. Inside the courtroom, my lawyer Sarah greeted us with a tight smile. "Remember," she whispered, "stay calm, no matter what. We have the truth on our side." As the judge entered and the proceedings began, I felt as though I was watching from outside my body. Carter's lawyer painted a picture of me as unstable, vindictive, and incapable of managing my own affairs. With each word, I felt my carefully reconstructed world threatening to crumble. When it was our turn, Sarah presented the evidence of Carter's infidelity and manipulation. I took the stand, my voice surprisingly steady as I recounted the betrayals and lies. But as I spoke, I saw the judge's expression remain impassive, and a seed of doubt took root in my heart. During a recess, I overheard Eleanor speaking to Carter in hushed, urgent tones. "We need to end this now," she hissed. "Use the nuclear option." My blood ran cold. What else could they possibly have up their sleeves? As we reconvened, Carter's lawyer called a surprise witness, Dr. Evelyn Matthews, a respected psychiatrist. My heart sank as I recognized her. I'd seen her briefly for anxiety after discovering Carter's infidelity. Dr. Matthews took the stand, her face a mask of professional concern. "In my professional opinion," she stated, "Addison exhibits signs of borderline personality disorder, exacerbated by recent stress. Her erratic behavior and accusations stem from this condition, making her unsuitable to manage her own affairs at this time." The courtroom spun around me. How could she say this? We'd only had 2 sessions, and I'd never been diagnosed with any such condition. I turned to Sarah in panic, but her face was grim. As Dr. Matthews continued her damning testimony, I felt the walls closing in. Everything I'd fought for, every step forward I'd taken, seemed to be slipping away. Carter and Eleanor wore twin expressions of triumph, and I realized with sickening clarity that they'd planned this all along. In that moment, staring at the faces of those who sought to destroy me, something inside me snapped. A calm, cold fury washed over me, clearing away the panic and doubt. I leaned over to Sarah, whispering urgently. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in determination. She nodded, then stood to address the judge. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess to confer with our client." The judge agreed, and I was ushered into a small conference room. Sarah, Leanne, and my father crowded around me, their faces etched with concern. "Addison, what are you thinking?" Sarah asked. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. "We need to turn the tables one last time," I said. "I have an idea, but it's risky. If it works, we expose Carter and Eleanor for who they really are. If it fails..." I trailed off, the implications hanging heavy in the air. My father placed a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever you decide, we're with you," he said firmly. Leanne nodded in agreement, all the way. I looked at each of them, feeling a surge of gratitude and determination. This was it, the final battle. Everything I'd been through, every lie uncovered and truth revealed, had led to this moment. "Okay," I said, my voice steady and resolved. "Here's what we're going to do." As we prepared to re-enter the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of calm. Win or lose, I would face this challenge on my own terms. Carter and Eleanor had underestimated me for the last time. The judge called the court back to order, and I straightened my spine, ready to fight for my future, my dignity, and my truth. As I stood in the courtroom, facing down Carter, Eleanor, and Dr. Matthews, a strange calm washed over me. I nodded to Sarah, who approached the bench. "Your Honor, we'd like to call a surprise witness of our own," she announced. Carter's lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting, but the judge, intrigued, allowed it. My heart pounded as the courtroom doors opened. Dr. Evelyn Matthews' identical twin sister, Dr. Mady Caroline Matthews, walked in. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. I watched as the color drained from Carter and Eleanor's faces. Caroline took the stand, her voice steady. "I'm here to expose a grave injustice. My sister, Evelyn, was coerced into providing false testimony about Addison's mental state. I have proof of the bribery and threats made by Carter Williams and his mother, Eleanor. She produced a series of emails and recorded conversations that laid bare Carter and Eleanor's desperation and manipulation. The judge's expression hardened as he reviewed the evidence. Carter leapt to his feet, shouting denials, but his protests rang hollow in the face of such damning proof. Eleanor sat frozen, her carefully crafted facade crumbling before my eyes. As the truth unfolded, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The judge called for order, his voice cutting through the chaos. In light of this new evidence, I'm dismissing the petition for control of Mrs. Williams' assets. Furthermore, I'm recommending a full investigation into Mr. Williams and Mrs. Eleanor Williams for perjury and witness tampering. Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by a bittersweet realization. This victory marked the end of a chapter in my life, a painful, transformative journey that had changed me forever. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by my supporters, I faced a sea of reporters. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. Today, justice was served, I began, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. But this isn't just about me. It's about standing up to manipulation and abuse, about reclaiming your power and your truth. As I spoke, I saw faces in the crowd, women nodding, some with tears in their eyes. I realized that my story resonated beyond just me. To anyone out there who's been made to doubt themselves, who's been gaslit or manipulated, your truth matters, your voice matters, and you are stronger than you know. In the days that followed, my life transformed. The boutique where I worked offered me a partnership, recognizing my resilience and business acumen. Leanne and I started a support group for women recovering from toxic relationships, turning our pain into purpose. One crisp autumn morning, I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked. A gentle knock at the door revealed my father, holding a small gift-wrapped package. "I'm so proud of you, Pumpkin," he said, enveloping me in a warm hug. "Your mother would be too." I unwrapped the gift with trembling hands to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a photo of my mother, her smile radiant and strong. "She always said you had her spirit," Dad said softly. "Now the whole world knows it too." Tears pricked my eyes as I fastened the locket around my neck. It felt like a talisman, a reminder of the strength that had always been within me. Later that evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on the tumultuous journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the moments of despair, they were all part of my story now. But they didn't define me. What defined me was how I'd risen above it all, how I'd found my voice, my strength, my truth. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities I'd never dared to imagine before. I was Addison Williams, survivor, fighter, and now, finally, the author of my own story. And this was just the beginning. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, my hands trembling as I gripped the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines, positive. My heart raced as I tried to process this life-changing news. How would I tell Chris? As if on cue, I heard the front door open. "Nora? You home?" Chris called out. I quickly shoved the test into my pocket and splashed some water on my face. "In here," I managed to reply, my voice shakier than I'd intended. Chris appeared in the doorway, his face etched with worry. "Everything okay? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just feeling a bit under the weather. How was your interview?" He ran a hand through his hair, a telltale sign of stress. "It was interesting. Can we talk?" We moved to the living room, settling onto our worn couch. Chris took a deep breath. "They offered me the job." "That's great news," I exclaimed, genuinely happy for him after a year of fruitless job hunting. His expression remained serious. "There's a catch, Nora. The position is in Seattle." My stomach dropped. "Seattle? But that's across the country. Our whole life is here, my art studio, our friends, your family." I know, Chris said, reaching for my hand, "but this is a fantastic opportunity. The salary is double what I was making before, and there's room for growth." I pulled away, standing up to pace the room. "What about my career? I've just started to build a name for myself in the local art scene." Chris's eyes pleaded with me. "You can paint anywhere, Nora, and with this salary, we could afford a house with a dedicated studio space for you." I felt torn. The pregnancy test weighed heavily in my pocket, a secret that would change everything. I don't know, Chris. It's such a big decision. We don't have to decide right this second, he said, his voice gentle, but they need an answer by the end of the week. Just then, a cry erupted from the baby monitor. Our daughter, Lily, was awake from her nap. I'll get her, Chris offered, standing up. As he left the room, I sank back onto the couch, my mind reeling. How could I uproot our entire life? But how could I ask Chris to turn down this opportunity after struggling for so long? When Chris returned with Lily, her chubby arms reached out for me. I took her, breathing in her sweet baby scent. Mama sad? Lily asked, her big blue eyes studying my face. I kissed her forehead. No, sweetheart, Mama's just thinking. Chris sat beside us, his arm around my shoulders. We're a team, Nora. Whatever we decide, we'll do it together. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. How could I tell him about the baby now? It would only complicate things further. I have an idea, Chris said suddenly. Why don't we take a drive to that little bed and breakfast we love? We can spend the weekend there, talk things through without any distractions. The thought of escaping, even for a couple of days, was tempting. What about Lily? My mom's been begging for some grandma time. I'm sure she'd be thrilled to watch her. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay, let's do it. As Chris made the arrangements, I excused myself to the bathroom. I pulled out the pregnancy test, staring at those 2 pink lines that had the power to change everything. How could I tell Chris now, with this job offer hanging over us? And how could I not? My mind raced with the possibilities, each scenario more daunting than the last. One thing was certain, this weekend getaway would be anything but relaxing. The moving truck rumbled away, leaving us standing in front of our new home in Seattle. Rain drizzled down, matching my mood perfectly. Chris squeezed my hand, his excitement palpable. This is it, Nora, our fresh start. I forced a smile, my free hand resting on my now visible baby bump. It's different. As we walked up the driveway, a voice called out, Welcome to the neighborhood. A statuesque blonde in yoga pants jogged towards us, all smiles and bouncing ponytail. I'm Angela, your next-door neighbor. Chris stepped forward, extending his hand. Chris, this is my wife, Nora, and our daughter, Lily. Angela's eyes lingered on Chris a beat too long before turning to me. Oh, and another one on the way. How exciting! I nodded, suddenly feeling frumpy in my travel-worn clothes. We're due in 4 months. Well, if you need anything at all, I'm right next door, Angela said, her hand on Chris's arm. Anything at all. As she jogged away, Chris chuckled. Friendly neighbors. That's a good sign, right? I mumbled agreement, but something about Angela's overly warm welcome left me uneasy. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. Chris threw himself into his new job, often working late. I struggled to find my footing, missing my old art studio and friends. One afternoon, while Lily napped, a knock at the door startled me. It was Angela, holding a plate of cookies. Thought you might need a pick-me-up, she said, breezing past me into the kitchen. How are you settling in? I followed, feeling oddly defensive in my own home. Fine, thanks. Chris is loving his new job. Angela's eyes sparkled. Oh, I know. We had lunch yesterday. He's quite the charmer, isn't he? My stomach clenched. You had lunch? Just a quick bite in the cafeteria, she waved dismissively. Did he not mention it? Anyway, there's a neighborhood barbecue this weekend. You simply must come. After she left, I stood in the kitchen, Angela's words echoing in my mind. Why hadn't Chris mentioned lunch? That evening, as we ate dinner, I casually asked, How's work going? Meet any new people? Chris nodded, mouthful of pasta. It's great. Everyone's been really welcoming. I waited, but he didn't elaborate. Anyone in particular? He shrugged. Not really. Oh, did I mention there's a company picnic coming up? I set down my fork. Actually, Angela invited us to a neighborhood barbecue. Same day, probably. Chris's face lit up. Perfect. We can do both. The picnic's in the afternoon. We can hit the barbecue after. I pushed my food around my plate. You seem awfully excited about the barbecue. He reached across the table, taking my hand. I'm excited about making friends here, Nora. This move was hard on all of us. I want it to work. I nodded, guilt washing over me. Was I being paranoid? The barbecue arrived, and I found myself surrounded by Angela's friends. They were all impossibly fit, sipping wine and trading neighborhood gossip. Oh, Nora, one woman said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. It must be so hard being pregnant in a new city, and with Chris working such long hours. Another chimed in. At least he has Angela to keep him company at work. She's such a dear, always looking out for the new employees. My head snapped up. What do you mean? The women exchanged glances. Oh, nothing, dear. It's just nice that he has a friendly face at the office. I scanned the yard, spotting Chris and Angela by the grill, laughing at some private joke. As I watched, she placed her hand on his arm, leaning in close to whisper something. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What was really going on here? As we drove home that night, Chris chatted happily about the new friends we'd made. I stared out the window, my mind racing. Nora? You okay? Chris asked, concern in his voice. I turned to him, searching his face. Chris, is there something you're not telling me? Chris's face paled at my question. What do you mean? I've told you everything. I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. It's just... You and Angela seem awfully close. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Nora, she's just being friendly. You're reading too much into this. I let it drop, but sleep eluded me that night. The next morning, while Chris was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I checked his phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through his messages. There it was, a thread with Angela. My heart raced as I opened it. Great seeing you today. Lunch again tomorrow? Absolutely. Same time, same place? Can't wait. You always brighten my day. I felt sick. The messages weren't explicitly romantic, but the familiarity, the frequency, it was all wrong. Chris's footsteps approached. I quickly put the phone down, my mind reeling. Hey, honey, he said, kissing my cheek. I'm heading out. Big presentation today. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Good luck, I managed to choke out. As soon as he left, I burst into tears. Lily toddled over, her little face scrunched with concern. Mama sad? I pulled her close, breathing in her sweet baby scent. No, sweetheart. Mama's okay. But I wasn't okay. Far from it. That afternoon, I took Lily to the park, desperate for a distraction. As she played in the sandbox, I sat on a nearby bench, lost in thought. Mind if I join you? I looked up to see an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair. Please, I gestured to the empty seat. I'm Marianne, she said, settling beside me. You look like you could use a friendly ear. Something about her warmth broke through my defenses. Before I knew it, I was pouring out the whole story. The move, Angela, the text messages. Marianne listened without judgment, her eyes filled with understanding. When I finished, she took my hand. Oh, honey, I've been where you are. What did you do? I asked, desperate for guidance. She smiled sadly. I ignored it, convinced myself I was imagining things. Don't make my mistake, Nora. Trust your instincts. As we talked, Lily ran over, proudly showing off a handful of pebbles. Marianne's face lit up. What a beautiful collection. You must be so proud of your mommy. Lily beamed, then ran back to play. Marianne turned to me, her expression serious. Whatever you decide to do, remember, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for her, too. Her words struck a chord. I thought of the baby growing inside me, of Lily's innocent face. They deserved better than this. But how can I be sure? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Marianne squeezed my hand. You dig deeper, gather evidence, and when you know for certain, you act. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, Chris's phone in my hands. He was working late again, or so he said. With trembling fingers, I opened his location history. My breath caught as I saw an unfamiliar address, visited multiple times over the past weeks. I grabbed my car keys, determination overriding my fear. It was time to see for myself. The address led me to a small apartment complex. As I pulled up, I saw Chris's car parked outside. My heart pounded as I approached the building. Through a ground-floor window, I saw them, Chris and Angela, sitting close on a couch, laughing over glasses of wine. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. It was real. It was all real. As I drove home, tears blurring my vision, one thought echoed in my mind. What am I going to do now? The annual company picnic loomed, and I dreaded every second of it. But I had to go. I needed to see Chris and Angela together with my own eyes. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for everything. As we arrived at the park, Chris squeezed my hand. You okay? You've been quiet lately. I forced a smile. Just tired. The pregnancy, you know. He nodded, distracted by something over my shoulder. Oh, there's Angela. I promised I'd help her set up the volleyball net. Before I could respond, he was gone, jogging towards that familiar blonde ponytail. I watched as they laughed together, their bodies in perfect sync as they worked. "Mama, swing!" Lily tugged at my hand, pulling me towards the playground. As I pushed Lily on the swing, my eyes never left Chris and Angela. They were always near each other, sharing private jokes, touching casually. It was like watching a dance I wasn't part of. "Your husband seems close with Angela," a voice beside me said. It was one of the women from the neighborhood barbecue. I stiffened. "They're just colleagues." She raised an eyebrow. "If you say so, dear, but if I were you, I'd keep a closer eye on them." Anger flared in my chest. How dare she? But as I opened my mouth to retort, I realized she was right. I needed to know the truth, once and for all. As the afternoon wore on, I lost sight of Chris. Panic rose in my throat. Where was he? Where was Angela? "Lisa, can you watch Lily for a minute?" I asked another mom. "I need to find Chris." I searched the crowded park, my heart pounding. Then I saw them, ducking behind a storage shed at the far end of the field. Without thinking, I followed. As I approached, I heard Angela's lilting laugh. "Oh, Chris, you're terrible." "You love it," Chris's voice replied, low and intimate. I peered around the corner of the shed, and my world shattered. Chris had Angela pressed against the wall, his lips on her neck, her hands tangled in his hair. A strangled gasp escaped me. They sprang apart, guilt written all over their faces. "Nora!" Chris exclaimed, his face pale. "It's not. This isn't." But I was already running, tears blurring my vision. I heard Chris calling after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I found myself at the playground, scooping up a confused Lily. "We're going home, baby," I choked out. "But Daddy?" she asked, looking around. "Daddy's busy," I said, my voice breaking. As I buckled Lily into her car seat, Chris caught up to us. "Nora, please, let me explain." I whirled on him, fury and pain coursing through me. "Explain what, Chris? How you've been lying to me? How you've been sneaking around with her?" He reached for me, but I jerked away. "Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me." "It was a mistake," he pleaded. "It didn't mean anything. I love you, Nora. You and Lily are my world." I laughed bitterly. "Your world? Is that why you've been spending every spare moment with her?" Chris's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk about this? We can fix this." For a moment, I wavered. I thought of our life together, of Lily, of the baby on the way, but then I remembered the sight of him with Angela, and my resolve hardened. "I don't know if we can fix this, Chris," I said, my voice cold. "I don't know if I want to." As I drove away, leaving Chris standing alone in the parking lot, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. What would I do now? How would I tell Lily? Could I raise 2 children on my own? But beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small voice whispered, "You're stronger than you know. You can do this." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, a plan already forming in my mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I hadn't slept in days. Chris's desperate calls and messages went unanswered as I grappled with the shattered pieces of my life. Lily's confused tears only deepened my anguish. How could I explain that Daddy wasn't coming home? One particularly rough morning, I found myself back at the park, hoping the fresh air might clear my head. Lily was with my mother, giving me a rare moment alone. "Nora?" a familiar voice called. It was Marianne, the kind older woman I'd met before. "Oh, honey, you look like you've been through hell." The sympathy in her eyes broke something in me. Before I knew it, I was sobbing, pouring out the whole sordid story between gasps. Marianne listened, her face a mix of compassion and anger. When I finished, she took my hands in hers. "You're stronger than you realize, Nora, but you need to be smart about this." "What do you mean?" I asked, wiping my eyes. She leaned in, her voice low. "Men like Chris, they're good at spinning tales. You need hard evidence before you make any decisions." I shook my head. "I saw them together. What more evidence do I need? For yourself? Nothing. But for a divorce, for custody, you need more." Marianne's eyes hardened. "I made the mistake of confronting my ex-husband without proof. He turned it all around on me, made me doubt myself. I won't let that happen to you." Her words sent a chill through me. "What should I do?" "Dig deeper," she said firmly. "Get into his email, his bank statements, follow him if you have to, and don't let on that you know anything." The thought of pretending everything was normal made me sick. "I don't know if I can face him." Marianne squeezed my hand. "You can, and you will, for Lily and for that baby you're carrying. They deserve better, and so do you." As I drove home, Marianne's advice echoed in my mind. Could I really play the role of the unsuspecting wife? The thought of Chris touching me, kissing me, while I knew about Angela made my skin crawl. But as I walked into our house, the house we'd chosen together, filled with memories and dreams, resolve steeled my spine. I would do whatever it took to protect my children and myself. That evening, when Chris came home, I forced myself to greet him with a smile. "Hi, honey. How was work?" The relief on his face was palpable. It was, "Good. Nora, can we talk?" I nodded, my heart racing. "Of course." We sat on the couch, an ocean of unspoken words between us. Chris took a deep breath. "About what happened at the picnic, it was a horrible mistake. Angela means nothing to me. You and Lily are everything." I wanted to scream, to throw his lies back in his face. Instead, I said softly, "I overreacted. I've been so emotional with the pregnancy. Can we just start over?" The hope that bloomed in Chris's eyes made me want to vomit. He pulled me into a hug, murmuring apologies and promises. Over his shoulder, my eyes fell on a framed photo of us with Lily, my beautiful, innocent daughter, my unborn child. They deserved the truth, whatever it might be. In that moment, I made my decision. I would play along, gather evidence, and when the time was right, I would bring it all crashing down. As Chris held me, thinking all was forgiven, I began to plan. I would leave no stone unturned, no secret unexposed. And when I was done, Chris and Angela would regret ever underestimating me. The game was on, and I intended to win. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. I played the role of the forgiving wife perfectly, all while gathering evidence with Marianne's help. We combed through bank statements, tracked Chris's movements, and even hired a private investigator. One rainy afternoon, Marianne and I huddled over my laptop, sifting through the latest batch of information from the PI. "Look at this." Marianne pointed to a series of transactions. Regular withdrawals, always the same amount, always on Fridays. My heart sank. The day he claims to work late. Marianne squeezed my hand. "We've got him, Nora. Now we just need the final piece of evidence." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the PI. "Meeting confirmed. Sending location now." I stood up, adrenaline coursing through me. "This is it. I'm going." Marianne looked concerned. "Are you sure? I could go instead." I shook my head. "No, I need to see this with my own eyes." The drive to the motel was a blur. Rain lashed against the windshield, matching the storm in my heart. I parked across the street, my eyes fixed on room 12. At exactly 7 p.m., a familiar car pulled up. Chris stepped out, looking around furtively before knocking on the door. Angela answered, pulling him inside. I felt numb. Even after everything, a part of me had hoped it wasn't true. I raised my phone, capturing video of Chris entering the room. Suddenly, a tap on my window made me jump. It was the PI, gesturing for me to roll down the window. "Mrs. Thompson, I've got audio set up in the room. Do you want to listen?" I hesitated, then nodded. He handed me a small device with headphones. Chris's voice came through clearly. "I can't keep doing this, Angela. Nora's pregnant. I need to focus on my family." Angela's laugh was cold. "Oh, please, you've been saying that for months. Face it, Chris, you're not happy with her. You never have been." "That's not true," Chris protested weakly. "Then why are you here?" Angela challenged. There was a long pause, then the unmistakable sound of kissing. I ripped off the headphones, bile rising in my throat. I'd heard enough. As I drove home, my mind raced. I had all the evidence I needed now. But what would I do with it? Marianne was waiting when I got back. One look at my face told her everything. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so sorry." As I recounted what I'd seen and heard, Marianne's expression hardened. "He doesn't deserve you, Nora. It's time to take back your life." "But how?" I asked, feeling lost. "A quiet divorce? Try to keep it civil for Lily's sake?" Marianne shook her head. "No. Men like Chris, they need to be exposed. Publicly. It's the only way they learn." Her words ignited something in me. Years of suppressed anger, of putting everyone else first, of dimming my own light, it all came rushing to the surface. "You're right," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "No more hiding. No more pretending. It's time everyone knew the truth." Marianne smiled, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. "That's my girl. Now let's plan this out properly. We want maximum impact." As we strategized late into the night, a part of me wondered if this was too far. Was public humiliation really the answer? But then I thought of Lily, of the baby I was carrying. I thought of all the women who had been in my shoes, who had suffered in silence. No more. It was time to reclaim my voice, my power, my life. As Marianne and I finalized our plan, I felt a mix of exhilaration and terror. In just a few days, everything would change. There was no going back now. I placed a hand on my growing belly, whispering a promise. We're going to be okay. Mama's going to make sure of it. The annual neighborhood block party was in full swing. Families mingled, kids ran around with sticky faces, and the air was thick with the smell of barbecue. I stood on the periphery, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Marianne appeared at my side, a reassuring presence. Are you ready? I nodded, unable to speak. In my hand, I clutched a USB drive containing all the evidence of Chris and Angela's affair. Photos, videos, bank statements, everything. Chris was at the grill playing the role of perfect husband and neighbor. Angela hovered nearby, laughing too loudly at his jokes. The sight of them together made my blood boil. Remember, Marianne whispered, wait for my signal. I watched as she made her way to the makeshift stage where the karaoke machine was set up. She tapped the microphone, drawing everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, Marianne announced, we have a special presentation from our very own Nora Thompson. This was it, my moment of truth. As I walked to the stage, Chris caught my eye. He smiled, oblivious to what was about to happen. I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Then I saw Angela place her hand on Chris's arm, and my resolve hardened. I plugged in the USB drive and grabbed the microphone. I have a story to tell you all, I began, my voice shaky but gaining strength. A story about betrayal, lies, and the importance of truth. The crowd fell silent, sensing the gravity in my tone. Chris's smile faltered. For months I've been living a lie, I continued, pretending everything was fine while my husband carried on an affair with our neighbor. Gasps rippled through the audience. Chris's face drained of color. Angela tried to slip away, but Marianne blocked her path. I have proof, I said, pressing play on the first video. Chris and Angela's voices filled the air, discussing their secret meetings. The crowd watched in stunned silence as image after image appeared on the screen. Chris entering the motel. Bank statements showing his withdrawals. Text messages full of intimate details. I locked eyes with Chris. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was too stupid, too trusting? He started towards the stage. Nora, please. No, I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my voice. You don't get to speak now. You've done enough talking behind my back. As the evidence continued to play, I saw the reactions around me. Shock, disgust, pity. Angela had collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Chris stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. But then I heard a small voice. Mommy? Lily stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. My triumph turned to ash in my mouth. What had I done? I stumbled off the stage, pushing past the murmuring crowd to reach my daughter. As I scooped her up, I caught sight of Chris. The devastation on his face mirrored my own. Nora, he choked out, I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk? But it was too late. The damage was done. As I carried Lily away from the chaos, Marianne caught up with us. You did it, Nora. You showed them all. No, I cut her off, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. This wasn't right. Not like this. Marianne's expression hardened. Don't go soft now. He deserved this. I looked at Lily, clinging to me in confusion, then back at the devastation I'd left behind. Maybe he did, but Lily didn't, and neither did I. As we walked away from the party, the sounds of shock and gossip fading behind us, I realized the bitter truth. In my quest for revenge, I'd hurt the very people I was trying to protect. The triumph I'd imagined felt hollow. Instead of closure, I was left with a gnawing question. What do I do now? The days following the block party were a blur of tears, hushed conversations, and sleepless nights. Chris moved out, staying with a friend. I was left alone with Lily, trying to explain why Daddy wasn't home. One afternoon, as Lily napped, I sat in my makeshift art studio, staring at a blank canvas. For the first time in years, I felt the urge to paint. As I picked up a brush, there was a knock at the door. It was Chris, looking haggard and remorseful. Can we talk? I nodded, letting him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the weight of our broken marriage between us. I'm so sorry, Nora, Chris began, his voice cracking. What I did was unforgivable. I understand if you want a divorce. I took a deep breath. I thought I did, but seeing Lily's face that day, it made me realize revenge isn't the answer. Chris looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying we owe it to Lily and to this baby. I placed a hand on my swollen belly to try and work through this. But things have to change, Chris. I won't be taken for granted again. We talked for hours, laying everything bare. Chris's insecurities about providing for the family, my resentment at giving up my art, the breakdown in our communication. It was painful, but cathartic. I want to go to counseling, I said firmly. Both of us, together and separately, and I'm going back to painting. It's not negotiable. Chris nodded eagerly. Anything you want, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. As we talked, I felt a shift within me. The anger that had consumed me for so long began to ebb, replaced by a sense of empowerment. I wasn't just Chris's wife or Lily's mother. I was Nora, artist, woman, survivor. Weeks turned into months. Chris threw himself into therapy, taking on more responsibilities at home. I set up a proper studio and started selling my paintings online. Slowly, we rebuilt trust. One evening, as we tucked Lily into bed, she asked, "Are you and Daddy happy now?" I looked at Chris, seeing the man I fell in love with, changed but somehow stronger. "We're working on it, sweetie, every day." As her due date approached, Nora found herself in her studio, working on a new piece. It was a self-portrait, not the meek housewife she'd become, but the strong, resilient woman she'd discovered. Chris appeared in the doorway, a mug of tea in hand. "That's incredible, Nora. It's so you." I smiled, really smiled for the first time in months. "It is, isn't it?" He set the tea down and wrapped his arms around me, careful of my belly. "I'm so proud of you and grateful you gave us another chance." I leaned into him, feeling our baby kick. "We've both changed, Chris. This isn't the life I imagined, but maybe it's the one we needed." As I put the finishing touches on my self-portrait, I realized that this, the messy, complicated, beautiful life we were rebuilding, was my masterpiece. The next day, I received an email from a gallery in the city. They wanted to feature my work in an upcoming show. As I shared the news with Chris, watching his face light up with genuine pride, I knew we'd be okay. Not perfect, but okay. That night, as we lay in bed, Chris's hand on my belly, I thought about the journey we'd been on. The pain, the betrayal, the near destruction of everything we'd built. But I also thought about the strength I'd found, the voice I'd reclaimed. I wasn't just Chris's wife or Lily's mother anymore. I was Nora Thompson, artist, survivor, woman reborn. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, I knew I had the strength to face them, not just for my family, but for myself. The canvas of our life wasn't perfect. It had its dark spots, its messy streaks, but it was ours, and it was beautiful in its own way. And I, Nora Thompson, was the artist holding the brush.
I'm building the ideal family with my new wife and this child right here. So, I'm divorcing you. You and your son need to leave this house immediately. My husband raised his voice with a snort. He had started a company making children's clothes when I was pregnant. Initially, he worked earnestly, but now he spends his days playing. And the company's management is barely hanging on. In the midst of dealing with my parents' death, he suddenly showed up with his mistress and their child. Confused, my son and I thought it unwise to argue in front of the house. So I let the three of them in. Suddenly, they demanded that my son and I leave the house. Despite the difficult situation of my parents' passing, my husband's unreasonable demands infuriated me. I was dumbstruck and couldn't respond. However, my son snorted. "Hey, what's with that insolent attitude? Dad, it's impossible for you to divorce Mom." "What are you talking about? A divorce can be done with just a single form. Don't you even know that, being a high school student?" But, as my son began to explain, Scott's face turned pale. "My name is Michelle Ford, a 47-year-old part-time homemaker. I help out with my family business part-time. I have one child, my son Aaron, a 16-year-old high school student. I've been married to Scott for 17 years. He's the president of an apparel company. Scott spends his days playing, though we can't afford such a lifestyle. The company barely makes a profit, and were in a dire financial state. Scott's income is unreliable, and he spends most of his salary on leisure. So it feels like I'm supporting our family with my part-time income. Aaron is very kind and always helps with household chores. However, he is cold towards Scott, and they do not speak to each other. Initially, I thought it was just a rebellious phase, but since he's kind to me, I realize it's because he dislikes Scott. Soon after starting high school, Aaron began working part-time. Scott and I met through work. I was working as a fashion magazine editor, and Scott was a designer at an apparel company. We met during a meeting to discuss featuring his company's products in a date outfit feature. The point of this outfit is to match the shoes and skirt colors to make the legs look slimmer. The color is white, which I think adds a sense of purity. That sounds great. The focus is clear, and it looks like it'll make for an understandable feature. Thank you. I've prepared a lot because it's been a while since I've had such a meeting. Scott was very serious, and he made various proposals during the meeting. After seeing him, I imagined that building a family with him would lead to a fun future. One day, when my company and Scott's had a dinner meeting, a tipsy Scott opened up to me. I want to dress my kids in the clothes I design. So, someday, I want to marry a good wife and have her give birth to adorable children. Have you ever designed children's clothes, Scott? Yeah, when I first joined the company, I was in charge of designing children's clothes. That's a wonderful dream. I also want to help make such beautiful dreams come true. Michelle, you have nice dreams too. After that, Scott asked for my contact details. We became close and eventually, Scott confessed his feelings, and we started dating. We were both nearing our 30s and married within a year of dating. I became pregnant soon after our wedding. During the early stages of pregnancy, I temporarily quit my part-time job and struggled with morning sickness. Hey, Scott. Why are you home this morning? I've decided to quit my job and start my own business. I think now is the time to make my dreams come true. Starting your own business? At a time like this, when a child is about to be born, I was taken aback. Don't worry, a client told me they have a job they want me to do. So there will be work. I see. But starting an apparel company requires a lot of preparations, right? Like, you need money for an office and to buy equipment. Yeah. But I don't have much money for preparations. Disappointed by Scott's lack of planning, I desperately searched for places to borrow money. However, all bank applications were denied. Preparing for the worst, I consulted my parents, who then offered to help Scott establish his company. They probably did so because they were expecting a grandchild. I'm truly grateful for my parents' kindness. Scott worked hard every day for the upcoming child. Although he often came home late from work, he never complained when I couldn't cook due to morning sickness. On weekends, he actively took on laundry and cleaning. However, Scott's attitude changed drastically one day, the day our child was born. When my water broke at night, Scott rushed me to the hospital. Scott, is your work okay? It's fine. There are no pressing business deals or deadlines. So I'll stay with you throughout. Don't worry about me, just focus on yourself. Scott spoke kindly and firmly held my hand as I struggled through labor. A few hours later, the birth was successfully completed. Congratulations. It's a healthy baby boy. A boy. Yes, a healthy baby boy. Is there something wrong? The nurse was puzzled, but Scott's solemn face didn't change. In fact, Scott had been hoping for a girl since I got pregnant. He often handled projects for girls' children's clothing at work. And since starting his own business, he had been working as a designer specializing in girls' children's clothing. During my pregnancy, all his children's clothing designs were for girls, and he had spent the entire time expecting a girl. We moved to the maternity ward, but Scott's disappointed expression remained. "Scott, it's a boy." "I'm sorry. Why isn't it a girl?" "There's nothing we can do. The gynecologist said there was a high chance of it being a boy. And, more importantly, we can't control the gender of our child. Then put the child in a baby box until you give birth to a girl." "What? I would never do such a horrible thing. Whether the child is a boy or a girl, they are my irreplaceable child." Scott began to distance himself from me, and I found myself raising our child alone. Hoping his depression was temporary, I persevered in housework and childcare with support from my parents. I also returned to part-time work, working hard every day. My coworkers were supportive of my parenting, and when Aaron was young, I could even bring him to work. However, as Aaron grew, Scott continued to neglect our family. Eventually, Scott's days away from home increased, as did his late returns. "Dad, I won a gold medal in the summer vacation art competition." "Huh, so? What are you trying to say?" "What do I mean?" "Ah, are you trying to brag that you have more artistic talent than me?" "No, that's not what I mean." "Scott, don't upset Aaron. Why don't you praise him a little?" "Shut up." Fine, it's a nice painting." Scott, clearly in a bad mood, slammed the door shut. His attitude towards Aaron was terrible, and he never participated in Aaron's school events. Whether it was the entrance ceremony, open class, music recitals, or graduation, his father was never present, which made Aaron feel alienated. Over time, Aaron grew to detest his father. Then, a significant turning point arrived. One Sunday, while I was cooking dinner, I received a call from my sister. "Hello, is that you, big sis?" "Michelle. Mom and Dad have passed away." "They passed away." The sudden news left me in shock. They had helped us so much since Aaron was born. I hadn't been able to repay them, and I was at a loss for words. "Why?" "They were fine when I saw them at Christmas. They were hit by a car that ran a red light." "Can you come to the hospital right now?" "Scott and Aaron haven't returned yet, so I'll head over as soon as they're back." I ended the call with trembling hands. When would Scott return? He hadn't told me when he would be back, so I didn't know when I could go to the hospital. I tried calling Scott but couldn't reach him. Even my messages were left unread. Why now, of all times? Despite my irritation, I was sinking into sorrow. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Oh, sorry." "Don't worry about it. What were you talking about on the phone just now?" "Actually, your grandparents have passed away. So when your father returns, we're going to the hospital where your grandparents are." "Understood." Aaron sat down on the sofa with a sad expression. Then I heard a car stop. Looking through the window to our driveway, I saw Scott's car. Good, Scott's back. Wait, what? Next to Scott was a woman dressed in high-end brands. Her flashy nails well manicured, a woman of tastes quite different from mine. Flamboyant and ostentatious. Beside the woman was a child dressed in pink. Could she be an acquaintance of Scott's? Is the child hers? But Scott was holding the woman's hand. Who was this woman? My mind was in chaos, and I panicked. Hey Michelle. It's me. Open up. Without even ringing the intercom, Scott was rattling the entrance door. To avoid further commotion, I hurriedly opened the door. Scott, welcome back. There's a crisis right now. Who is this? I stared at the woman next to Scott. She held his arm confidently, as if she had been waiting to introduce herself. Nice to meet you. I'm Scott's wife, Kristen. Hey, Kristen. Calling yourself the wife is a bit premature, isn't it? Scott and Kristen began cooing in sickly sweet voices. And who might this child next to you be, Kristen? Nicole, say hello. Nice to meet you, I'm Nicole. Nicole is the child Kristen and I have together. Kristen gave me a girl, unlike you. A child. My body tensed up. Could it be that Scott had a mistress and a child while he was away from home? Hey Michelle, let us in. I have something to talk about. All right. With no choice but to continue the conversation inside, I followed Scott's direction and led him and his mistress into the house. Guests? Yes, it seems Dad brought his mistress. Mistress. Dad was having an affair? It looks like it. We're about to have a detailed talk. Can I sit in on this too? If Aaron wants to join, that's fine. I hesitated to involve Aaron in what might be a messy situation. But seeing his serious expression and realizing he was old enough to understand, I let him sit next to me. We moved Nicole to another room and sat down. Kristen across from me, Scott across from Aaron. Scott seemed displeased with Aaron's presence, but I decided to proceed regardless. I'm building the ideal family with Kristen and Nicole in this house. So, Michelle, I'm divorcing you. You and Aaron need to leave this house right now. Scott, you're so cool. Scott raised his voice with a snort while Kristen gazed at him with starry eyes. I was sick of their couple-like behavior, and it made me nauseous. Despite the dire situation of my parents' passing, my husband's outrageous statements infuriated me. I was dumbstruck and couldn't respond. However, Aaron snorted in disdain. Hey Aaron, what's with that cheeky attitude? Dad, it's impossible for you to divorce Mom. What are you talking about? A divorce can be done with just a single form. Don't you know that, being a high school student? Dad, you haven't repaid the money Grandpa lent to the company, have you? Scott's face turned pale all at once. Kristen looked puzzled. I almost burst out laughing seeing the temperature difference in their expressions. In fact, Scott had borrowed money from my parents, with the promise to repay it gradually once the company stabilized. However, Scott had been making excuses to delay repayment. Could it be, Dad, that you wanted to divorce to escape repaying? But that's not going to work. Grandpa told me to make sure you repay. When did you make such a promise? Were you with my father-in-law while I was gone? I've actually been meeting with Grandma and Grandpa quite a bit. Where did you meet them? At my part-time job, Grandpa's company. Don't you even know where your child works? You're lying. This is the first time I've heard of it. Yes, in fact, my son had been working part-time at my parents' company. Aaron, having seen me support the family all this time, wanted to help me someday. When he entered high school, he expressed his desire to work part-time. When he was wondering where to work, I suggested to my parents that he work at their company. Then, my parents happily agreed, saying it would be good training for an heir. Initially, Aaron was assigned simple clerical work. But he also got involved in tasks like advising on new products. which could be handled by someone young, and he enjoyed his work. Since starting the part-time job, Aaron had become more reliable. His words were stronger than anyone else's, and I almost cried with joy seeing how hard he had worked raising him. So, Scott, make sure you repay the $100,000 our parents lent, okay? Encouraged by Aaron's words, I delivered the final blow to Scott. Scott, what's this about? You told me you were a department head at a major apparel company with an annual income of $100,000. Is this debt of $100,000 real? Kristen. It's not true. What he's saying is nonsense. I can show you proof if you want. I have the loan repayment agreement at home. Stop it, Michelle. Ignoring Scott's words, I showed the repayment agreement we had signed when we received the financial support. Scott collapsed to his knees. There's no way I can pay back such a large amount of money. It's impossible. Scott. This story is true, isn't it? Dad, like I said earlier, you can't divorce until you repay the money. Shut up. If that's the case, Kristen, can you take over my debt? I'll repay it quickly for Nicole's sake. Kristen, what do you think? We could get married right away, right? Kristen's face turned increasingly red. Scott, you liar. I didn't know anything about this. First of all, this debt isn't something I created. Scott and Kristen suddenly started arguing. Aaron looked down on them with a disgusted expression. For Aaron's sake too, please don't show us such an ugly sight. I picked up Nicole, who was in another room, and kicked out Scott, Kristen, and Nicole from the house. Mom, let's hire a detective to claim compensation from Dad. Yes, I'll think about it. I felt proud of my son's dependable appearance. Then I made a phone call. Hello, it's me. I have a favor to ask, is that okay? When I explained the situation to the person, they replied, Understood, let's start moving on it tomorrow, in a gentle voice. After that, I spent several busy weeks. There were lots of things to do, like the funeral for my parents and taking over the company. I was sleeping late and waking up early, leading to days of sleep deprivation. I ended up with a bad cold and couldn't go to work for a while. Aaron cared for my health and did the housework after school. While eating the rice porridge Aaron made, the intercom rang. Michelle. Open up quickly. I staggered to the entrance and slowly opened the door. What's the matter, Scott? Why did you come all of a sudden? My company has been leveled. Where did my company go? Company? What are you talking about? There's no such company. Did you do something? You shouldn't just get rid of the company I started for my dream. Despite feeling unwell, Scott grabbed me by the collar. As I was coughing, he seemed to realize something and suddenly pushed me away. I stumbled and fell to the floor. What, a cold? Don't spread your filthy germs to me, disgusting. Isn't that a terrible way to treat Michelle? I think it's very rude. Tracy. Emerging from the back of the room was my sister Tracy. She has always been strong on justice and very strict with people who do not keep promises or rules. Since Aaron was born, Scott had become slovenly and was quite afraid of my sister. Why are you in the house? To discuss that, can you stop rampaging at the entrance and come inside? Overwhelmed by my sister's pressure, Scott reluctantly entered the house. With a dominating look, my sister stared down at Scott, who trembled like a small animal frightened by its natural predator. Tracy, why are you in the house right now? I needed to discuss the company takeover with Michelle. Company takeover? What are you talking about? Ah, right. Actually, I've absorbed and merged your company. Absorption merger. I haven't heard anything about that. Scott's shoulders shook violently. I wanted to laugh out loud seeing his pitiful state. But knowing my sister would scold me for such behavior, I held back my emotions. In fact, Tracy had been managing Scott's company for quite some time. Scott had neglected the business due to his affair. And the company was almost bankrupt. I, busy with my part-time job, hadn't realized it. But when Tracy investigated Scott's company, she found it was drowning in red ink. Knowing a lot about business management, Tracy thought she would try to turn the company around. Scott's management was quite terrible. But the quality of the products he was creating was quite good. So, I thought it might be a good idea to rebuild it under my company. But, an absorption merger like this without notice is illegal. I'll sue. Well, why don't you check the loan repayment agreement first? Hey Michelle, get out the loan repayment agreement. At Scott's request, I pulled the loan repayment agreement from the drawer. When Scott saw the agreement, his eyes widened as if he saw something he shouldn't have. What is this? The agreement stated that the company was registered under my parents' names. Yes, Scott's company was established under the ownership of my parents. Actually, all the paperwork and necessary administrative tasks for setting up the company were done by my parents and Tracy. Therefore, they were able to change the company's registration to my parents' names without Scott noticing. With the passing of my parents, Tracy inherited half of their estate, which included Scott's company. Initially hesitant about the merger, I talked to Tracy about Scott and suggested that we get rid of Scott's company without his knowledge. That's when she told me about the inheritance. So, my company will become Tracy's property. Yes. We will be asking you to leave the company. Tracy. Could you at least hire me as a designer? Scott suddenly became humble, but his intentions were transparent. And Tracy glared at him. That's impossible. This strategy was to get rid of you, so hiring you is out of the question. So, does that mean I'll be unemployed? Yes, well, good luck. Scott stood there, dumbfounded. By the way, I have something to show you, Scott. I pulled out several photos from an envelope. The photos showed Kristen enjoying walks to hotels and shopping with men who were not Scott. Moreover, the companions were different in each photo. Some older than Scott, some younger. When I first saw these photos, I was fed up with Kristen's irresponsibility. Scott looked at the photos in shock. Kristen, you're walking with a man who isn't me. This isn't some kind of composite, is it? Actually, I hired a detective agency to catch your affair. It turned out Kristen was involved with multiple men. She might be something of a sugar baby. So, Nicole's father might not be me. It seems so. The detective said it wasn't you. Maybe you should get a DNA test. Seeing Scott about to cry, I decided to deliver the final blow. Scott, I can no longer be with you as a wife. I want a divorce. Also, I'll need compensation, child support for Aaron, and the repayment of the capital that my parents fronted, totaling about $150,000. I can't pay that kind of money, Michelle. Please, give me another chance. It's impossible. I've completely lost feelings for you. As Scott broke down crying on all fours, Tracy looked on blankly. Scott, no matter how much you struggle, it's hopeless. The damage you've done to Michelle can't be resolved with money. So, you must take responsibility at the very least. Crying, Scott turned to Tracy. Then shakily sat back down and slowly began to sign the divorce papers I laid out. After that, Scott incurred significant debt to pay the compensation and funds owed. Initially, I thought about allowing him to pay in installments. But Aaron advised against it. Do you think someone as unreliable as Dad can pay in installments? He'll definitely default. Realizing he was right, I demanded payment in full. As Aaron suggested. Scott's parents, concerned about their social standing, did not help with his debts. Unemployed, Scott struggled to find a new job. Having been virtually jobless for over 10 years, no company would hire him. He ended up working odd jobs introduced by debt collectors. I also demanded compensation from Kristen. She took on debt and worked day and night. As an office worker by day and a nightclub worker by night. Incidentally, the DNA test confirmed, as the detective had said, that Scott and Nicole were not related. Now, I run the company Tracy handed over to me, with Aaron helping with new product proposals. Mom, I want to use softer materials for our next product. That's a great idea. Let's try it. Working with Aaron is truly enjoyable, and he inspires me daily. What shall we do today? I live motivated by the joy of my work.
As I sat at the elegantly set Thanksgiving dinner table in my parents' house, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of my childhood home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. At 60, these visits had become my refuge from the stifling atmosphere of my own home. The lively chatter of my daughter Emma with her grandmother filled the room, a stark contrast to the silence that often enveloped my conversations with Richard, my husband. My phone vibrated sharply, disrupting the warmth of the moment. Richard's name flashed across the screen, sending a shiver down my spine. With a hesitant sigh, I excused myself. "Excuse me, it's Richard. I'll just take this in the kitchen." But as I rose, my fingers slipped and the phone speaker activated. "Elaine, having fun over there?" "Well, don't bother coming back." Richard's voice, unnaturally cheerful, echoed through the room. I stood frozen, phone in hand, as his words hung in the air. "What are you talking about, Richard?" "Oh, I've decided it's time for a change. I've moved Emma's stuff into the house. There's no room for you anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's fork dropped with a clatter, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Richard, what in the world are you saying?" My voice was barely above a whisper, heart pounding in my chest. "It's simple, really. Emma doesn't want to come home because of you. Without you, she can finally live the life she deserves, like when she was a child. So leave." Emma stood up abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. "Dad, what are you?" "Stay out of this, Emma." Richard's voice cut through, sharp and cold. "This is between me and your mother." My cheeks burned with a mix of humiliation and anger. "You want me to leave our home? Just like that?" "Yes, and you can go to some shelter or whatever. Doesn't matter to me." The call ended abruptly, leaving a haunting silence. My mother reached out, her hand trembling. "Elaine, honey." But before she could finish, Emma burst into laughter, incredulous and bitter. "He's lost it, Grandma. Completely lost it." Inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions. Humiliation, anger, and a strange sense of liberation. He better be ready, I thought to myself. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. As I lay in my childhood bed that night, the moonlight casting shadows across the room, my mind wandered back through the years, sifting through memories of Richard and me. Our story wasn't always filled with cold silences and bitter words. There was a time when Richard's gaze held warmth, and his touch promised safety. I met Richard when I was in my late 20s. He was charming, confident, and seemed to have an answer for everything. I was captivated by his charisma and how he seemed to take the world in his stride. We married within a year of meeting, a whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale. But the fairy tale began to crumble soon after Emma was born. Richard's affection for our daughter was undeniable, Yet as his love for her grew, his regard for me seemed to wane. It was as if his heart had room only for one. "Elaine, can't you see you're smothering her? Let her breathe," he would chide whenever I tried to be involved in Emma's upbringing. His words stung, but I believed he was just being an overly protective father. As Emma grew, so did Richard's disdain towards me. The man who once looked at me like I was his world now barely acknowledged my existence, except to criticize. "Why can't you be more like Emma? She's only 10 and already so independent," he'd say with a sneer. I remember the night when Emma, at 15, won a school award. We were supposed to celebrate as a family, but Richard turned it into a lecture session. "Elaine, why can't you achieve anything like our daughter? You're just wasting your life away," he said, his words like daggers. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of years of his contempt. It wasn't just the words, it was the dismissive glances, the heavy sighs, the way he'd turn away when I entered a room. I had become a ghost in my own home, invisible and insignificant. But that night, as I lay in the quiet, a resolve began to stir within me. Richard's callousness on the phone, his brazen dismissal of our life together, it had lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let him erase me from my own story. I turned on my side, closing my eyes, but sleep eluded me. The shadows on the wall seemed to whisper, urging me to stand up, to fight back. And I knew, deep down, that I was ready to do just that. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Over breakfast, Mom tried to discuss Richard's call, but I steered the conversation elsewhere. I wasn't ready to delve into that can of worms, not yet. Emma, sensing my unease, didn't press either. As we cleaned up, my thoughts drifted back to the recent years with Richard. His controlling behavior wasn't just confined to our daughter. It seeped into every aspect of our lives, tightening like a vice around my freedom. "Elaine, I don't want you working late. You need to be home to cook dinner," he would demand, disregarding my career in the library, which I cherished. His rules were arbitrary and ever-changing, designed to keep me off balance. If I wore something he didn't approve of, he would scoff. "Dressing up? Trying to impress someone? You should focus on being a better wife and mother." Even my friendships weren't spared. "You're spending too much time with Linda. She's a bad influence," he declared one day, his words slicing through years of friendship like a knife. But it wasn't just the control. It was the humiliation. At social gatherings, he would belittle me with backhanded compliments, often in front of Emma. "Elaine tries her best, but you know, she's not the brightest bulb," he'd say with a laugh that made my skin crawl. Emma saw it all. At first, she tried to defend me, but Richard's influence was too strong. "Mom, just ignore him," she would whisper, a look of helplessness in her eyes. I remember the day Emma left for college. Richard was beaming with pride, but there was a coldness in his eyes when he turned to me. "See, Elaine, this is what happens when you raise a child right. She's not like you, thank God." That stung more than anything. The implication that I had no part in our daughter's upbringing, that my years of love and sacrifice meant nothing. As these memories churned in my mind, a simmering anger began to bubble to the surface. No more. I wouldn't let Richard dictate my life, not anymore. The phone call was the last straw. It was time for Richard to face the consequences of his actions. I looked at Emma, her face a mirror of my resolve. "Emma, there's something I need to do when we get back. It's going to change everything, but I need you to trust me." Emma nodded, determination in her eyes. "I'm with you, Mom, all the way." The drive back home was filled with a tense silence. Emma and I were both lost in our thoughts as the weight of the impending confrontation with Richard hanging heavy in the air. Once home, I retreated to my room, ostensibly to unpack, but really to make a call that would set everything in motion. I dialed the number of a divorce attorney I had discreetly noted down a few months ago. My hands trembled as I heard the line connect. "Hello, this is Elaine Richardson. I need to discuss a divorce." The lawyer, Mr. Adams, was calm and reassuring. "I understand this is a difficult time, Mrs. Richardson. We can help you navigate through this process." As I detailed Richard's behavior over the years, Mr. Adams listened intently. "We can file for divorce on grounds of emotional abuse. It seems you have a strong case." Feeling a sense of empowerment, I replied, "I want to go through with this, and I want him to pay for what he's done, not just legally, but financially too." Mr. Adams assured me, "We will do everything we can to ensure you receive what you're entitled to." After the call, I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life. Later that evening, Richard returned home, his demeanor smug and triumphant. "So, you're back. Realized you have nowhere else to go?" His words cut deep, but I held my ground. "I went to my parents' house, Richard. Remember the place you practically banished me to?" He scoffed. "I did us a favor. Emma and I are better off without you." "That's where you're wrong," I said, my voice steady. "Emma is not a pawn in your twisted game, and I am not your prisoner anymore." Richard's face contorted in anger. "What are you blabbering about? You think you can survive without me?" I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "Watch me." Emma entered the room, her expression one of quiet strength. "Dad, you've gone too far. Mom doesn't deserve this." Richard sneered. "Oh, now you're taking her side? I thought you understood, Emma. Your mother is useless." Emma's eyes blazed with anger. "No, Dad. The only useless thing here is your cruelty. We're done living under your shadow." As we stood there, united against Richard's scorn, I knew we had crossed a point of no return. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my freedom. The morning after our declaration, the house felt like a battlefield. Richard's usual air of arrogance was more pronounced, as if he was daring us to challenge him. As I made breakfast, my hands shook slightly, but my resolve was firm. At the table, Richard broke the silence with his typical condescension. "So, Elaine, have you finally realized your place? Ready to beg for forgiveness?" I kept my voice calm. "There's nothing to beg for, Richard. I'm not the one who should be apologizing." He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "You've always been delusional, but this is a new low, even for you." Emma, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Dad, this isn't a joke. We're serious. Mom is filing for divorce." The look on Richard's face was one I had never seen before. Confusion, disbelief, and then anger. "Divorce? You think you can just walk away from me, after everything I've done for this family?" "It's precisely because of what you've done," I said, my voice rising. "Years of belittling, controlling, and humiliating me. I won't stand for it anymore." Richard slammed his fist on the table, his face red. "I made this family. Without me, you're nothing." Emma stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You didn't make this family, Dad. You tore it apart, and Mom is more than something. She's everything you're not." His gaze shifted between us, a wild look in his eyes. "You're teaming up against me, your own husband, your own father?" "This isn't about sides, Richard. It's about right and wrong," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "And what you've done is unforgivably wrong." Richard's laughter was bitter. "You think you can just leave and everything will be fine? You have no idea what you're in for." I met his gaze squarely. "I know exactly what I'm in for. Freedom from you." Emma moved to stand beside me, a united front. "We're done being under your control, Dad. It's over." Richard stood abruptly, his chair toppling behind him. "You'll regret this. Both of you. You don't know what I'm capable of." As he stormed out of the room, the tension he left behind was suffocating. But amidst that tension, there was also a sense of liberation. The battle had begun, and I was ready to fight for my freedom, my dignity, and my daughter's future. The days following our confrontation with Richard were a whirlwind of activity. I met with Mr. Adams several times, laying out the groundwork for the divorce. He was meticulous, ensuring every detail was accounted for. "We'll make sure you get what you deserve, Elaine, both financially and legally," he assured me. Richard's reaction to the divorce papers was volcanic. He stormed into the house one evening, papers in hand, his face a mask of fury. "You're actually going through with this? Do you have any idea what you're doing, Elaine?" I faced him with a calm I didn't feel. "Yes, Richard, I do. For the first time in years, I'm making a decision for myself." He laughed mockingly. "You think you can survive without me? You're nothing without my money, my support." "I'm not afraid of being on my own, Richard. I'm more afraid of spending another day under the same roof as you," I replied, my voice steady. Emma, hearing the commotion, came downstairs. "What's going on?" "Your mother has lost her mind. That's what's going on," Richard spat out. "She thinks she can just take half of everything I've worked for. It's not just what you've worked for, Dad. It's what Mom has endured for all these years. She deserves every penny and more." Emma countered. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Don't be foolish, Emma. This will ruin us all. No, Dad, it will free us, especially Mom. As the days turned into weeks, the house became a cold war zone. Richard moved into the guest room, his presence like a dark cloud. Despite his attempts to sway me, my decision was final. The day of the first court hearing arrived. As I sat in the courtroom, waiting for the proceedings to start, I felt an odd sense of serenity. I was doing the right thing, not just for myself, but for Emma as well. Richard, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves. When his lawyer talked about a settlement, I couldn't help but smile. Richard, who always prided himself on his control, was now at the mercy of the court. As the judge reviewed our case, Richard's face grew paler. When the judge turned to me and asked if I had anything to add, I took a deep breath. Your Honor, for years I endured emotional abuse and manipulation at the hands of my husband. I'm not seeking revenge, I'm seeking justice, for myself and for my daughter. The judge nodded, his expression solemn. I understand, Mrs. Richardson. This court will ensure fair judgment is passed. As we left the courtroom, Richard's defeated look was all I needed to see. The battle wasn't over, but I had won the first round, and I was ready for whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, my life felt like it was under a microscope, scrutinized by lawyers in the court. But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more in control of my destiny. Richard's attempts to intimidate me became more desperate and less effective. The final court hearing was a day I had both dreaded and longed for. As Richard and I sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, I couldn't help but reflect on the man I once loved, now a stranger filled with bitterness. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered the verdict. The court finds in favor of Mrs. Richardson. Mr. Richardson, you are required to pay alimony and half of your assets. Richard's face was a picture of shock and rage. He stood up abruptly, his chair clattering to the floor. This is ridiculous. She doesn't deserve a penny. Mr. Richardson, control yourself, the judge admonished. The court has made its decision. As we left the courtroom, Richard's parting words were venomous. You'll regret this, Elaine. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the end of me. But I no longer feared him. His words, once so cutting, now seemed empty and powerless. In the months that followed, I found a small apartment close to Emma's place. I started a new job at a local library, a place that had always brought me peace. The alimony from Richard allowed me financial freedom I hadn't experienced in years. Emma and I grew closer, our relationship no longer overshadowed by Richard's presence. She was thriving in her career and personal life, a stark contrast to the frightened young woman she had been. As for Richard, the last I heard, he was living a diminished life, his pride and finances greatly reduced. His attempts to reach out to Emma and me were met with silence. The man who once held so much power over us was now just a memory, a shadow of the past. I often sit on my balcony, a cup of tea in hand, looking out at the peaceful neighborhood. I've found a sense of tranquility and purpose that was missing for so long. The journey was painful, filled with struggles and heartaches, but it led me to a place of peace. Emma visits often, and we talk about everything and nothing. Our bond, forged in adversity, is now unbreakable. As I look towards the future, I do so with hope and a sense of freedom. I've emerged from the shadows of my past stronger and more resilient. I've learned that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest triumphs. And as for Richard, he is nothing more than a distant echo, a reminder of a life I once lived and the strength I gained in leaving it behind.